Apostolic Fathers that we'll be covering for tonight. The first on the list is Clement. Clement wrote about, I don't want to reveal yet, but you'll find out within a minute. He wrote about a mythical bird that once when you hear it, you'll be like, oh, what? The same way I reacted when I first read this. To this day, I don't know what to think about this, but it's so interesting. And we want to start with Clement and his writing, especially once when you hear what is it about, once when we compare it with Christ. Okay. So in Clement's letter, this is what he wrote in chapter 25. Let us observe the remarkable sign that is seen in the regions of the east, that is, in the vicinity of Arabia. There is a bird that is named the phoenix. This bird, the only one of its species, lives for 500 years. When the time of its dissolution and death arrives, it makes for itself a coffin-like nest of frankincense and myrrh and the other spices, into which, its time being completed, it enters and dies. But as the flesh decays, a certain worm is born, which is nourished by the juices of the dead bird and it eventually grows wings. Then, when it has grown strong, it takes up that coffin-like nest containing the bones of its parent and carrying them away, it makes its way from the country of Arabia to Egypt to the city called Heliopolis. There, in broad daylight, in the sight of all, it flies to the altar of the sun and deposits them there. And then it sets out on its return. The priests then examine the public records of the times, and they find that it has come at the end of the 500 year. I find this fascinating that one of the most famous church or apostolic fathers, Clement, would record a story that wasn't happening in Israel, that wasn't found in the Bible, but that he still found it very important to mention to the contemporary readers, so the Christians of his time. Sean, when it comes to this passage, so let's start first, like I said, with chapter 25. It's so obvious, it's inevitable. We have to compare this with the life, death, resurrection, and new birth of Jesus, but also Jesus in us. What is it that you would like to say when it comes to this passage and biblical parallel and appliance in our life?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's such thing as an actual phoenix. But I don't know necessarily that Clement did either. He states that it was this legend from Saudi Arabia that flies to Egypt, but he's not relying on any of that information in order to make his point. His point isn't that there's some bird called a phoenix and this is the taxonomy of the bird and this is the features of the bird and so you should go look for this thing. It's more, yeah, there's this story that is very well known and here's how you get the gospel out of it. So what Clement is doing here is really what your podcast is about. Hey, look at this thing that everybody knows and here's how you get the gospel out of it.
Yeah, I I share the same conclusion as you do. I don't know, and I don't think that he actually believed there was Phoenix, especially because he didn't see it. So this was probably a story that one of the stories that was popular in his time. So he was doing what Paul was doing, but also what Moses was doing in the Old Testament, using what was popular as part of the mythical and legendary in their folklore and tales, and somehow changing it to point to Christ. The same way I can take maybe this hot coffee, and even though it has nothing to do with Jesus, maybe I can if I go out uh, with a friend who is not a Christian and he loves coffee, I can use it and somehow parallel that with the gospel and God, and turn the same story and use it to make to use this tool such as a mug filled with coffee and point him to Christ. Of course, you have to be creative with that. But then Clement had all the time, just as did Paul when they were writing, they were not in a hurry. And to me, this is fascinating how we can use almost everything in this life and in this world to baptize and redeem objects, uh, or hobbies or anything of that sort. It can be sport, it can be art, it can be music, it can be anything. And we can use that to preach the gospel. That's amazing. But what also caught my mind is that when he says in verse 3, but as the flesh decays, so we know that our flesh will decay one day. Jesus's flesh had to die. And then he says, a certain worm is born, which is nourished by the juices of the dead bird and eventually grows wings. So I'm gonna go metaphorically and spiritualize this passage, saying how you can see that this new life depends on the old life, because the old life brings that juice and gives it nourishment. So I just want to say how, when Jesus was saying that he's the vine and we are the branches, we depend on him to grow, and not just to be born again, but to continue walking in that new life, in that new birth. So this reminded me a bit of our Christian walk and being what we like to say in the evangelical church, born again. So this is a story that reminds me, like you said, of the gospel, and I find it very interesting. Passage, I mean, chapter 26 says, "How then can we consider it to be some great and marvelous thing if the Creator of the universe shall bring about the resurrection of those who have served Him in holiness, in the assurance born of a good faith, when He shows us by a bird no less the magnificence of His promise? For it says somewhere, and you will raise me up, and I will praise you. And then again, I lay down and slept. I rose up, for you are with me. And again, Job says, and you will raise this flesh of mine, which has endured all these things. So now we see, so the chapter 26 is very short. We see how Clement is switching from bird to like, okay, but let me give you the significance, let me give you the meaning, let me give you the parallel. How, if let's say this was true, if in the natural, because let's say Phoenix truly existed, I'm not going there, but he's trying to say how, if this happens in the natural world, don't you think that God, who lives outside of this natural world, who's transcendent, how much of the same pattern of resurrection he can give and bring to his servants? So if something happens in the natural world, don't you have bigger expectations when it comes to supernatural? Is this something that you're also perceiving from this passage?
So in Sunday, my pastor is preaching through 1 Corinthians 15, and so this maps very easily onto 1 Corinthians 15. One thing that I was thinking about with the that worm being nourished by the juices, I was almost thinking like, man, that should have been in Luke as one of the what is the kingdom of God like? Because it starts off as a worm, something small, and it ends up carrying the bones of this great bird away. And so it's one of those, how do we understand the kingdom of God? And Jesus relates it to like yeast working its way through a lump, or like a mustard seed that starts off small and ends up being the largest of the bushes in a garden. And secondly, with this chapter 26, where we're talking about how you can be sure that God will raise you from the dead. And again, that maps very well onto 1 Corinthians 15, because that's Paul's argument there. How do we know that God will raise you from the dead? But then it says, when he shows us by a bird. So he takes the majesty of the phoenix and he drops it back down to, this is a bird. Well, what does Jesus say? Are you not worth more than many sparrows? And so it's like, if he's willing to do this for a bird, how much more is he willing to do for you?
Oh my gosh, I love that. Like God shares a small part of his majesty to clothe us in his majesty so that we can go from mortality to immortality. I love it. That would be a wonderful conclusion of a sermon.